All right, so you're here, and you want to get to the heart of things.
Yeah.
You want to learn, but you don't want to have to, like, dig through tons and tons of information.
Exactly. You want those key takeaways, those insights that stick with you. No one wants to feel overwhelmed just trying to learn something new.
That's what we're all about here. We take these big topics that we all want to understand better, and we sort of distill them down. Find the essence, give you those aha moments that make it all click.
Right. And today we're going deep on something pretty fundamental, I think you'd agree, the nature of joy. How to actually cultivate joy, even when life gets tough.
And to guide us in this deep dive, we've got the Book of Joy, which, by the way, is a record of a week-long conversation between the Dalai Lama and Archbishop Desmond Tutu, facilitated by Douglas Abrams.
Yeah, two Nobel Peace Prize laureates. Two spiritual leaders from very different backgrounds coming together to share their insights on living with joy, even in the face of suffering. It's a really remarkable book, I think.
Yeah. I mean, they weave together personal stories, deep spiritual understanding, and even bring in the latest scientific research on happiness.
And what we'll do is kind of filter out the noise for you, right?
Yeah.
Connect the dots and pull out what's most important so you can gain a richer understanding of joy without feeling like, oh my gosh, this is too much.
Exactly. So if you're someone who values getting to the core of things, efficiently but still thoroughly, and you love those aha moments, you're in the right place.
Yeah. So our mission for this deep dive is to really understand what joy is at its core, how it's different from happiness, and most importantly, what are those practical steps you can actually take to make joy a more constant part of your life?
All right, so jumping right into the book, it starts with this lovely idea, a birthday gift of sorts. It's an invitation to experience more joy and happiness. But right away, they grapple with a pretty big question. Is joy even possible? I mean, think about all the daily struggles, the suffering, the injustices in the world, even the state of the environment.
It's a valid question. Can you really be joyful with all that going on? And the Archbishop, he makes a really powerful statement early on. He says, joy is your birthright. And it's something much deeper than happiness. He emphasizes that happiness is often linked to external things, good news, a nice day, a success at work. But joy isn't dependent on those fleeting things.
Right, so it's more of an inner state then, not something that comes and goes based on what's happening around you.
Yes. And the book really highlights how both the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop view this state of mind and heart as what truly energizes our lives, what leads to real fulfillment.
I see. So they delve into what the Dalai Lama calls the purpose of life, avoiding suffering and discovering happiness.
Exactly. And the key for you, I think, is how to make joy a lasting way of being. Not something that just pops up every now and then, but a true characteristic. Even when you experience sorrow, which, let's face it, is inevitable.
It's interesting how the book is structured around their week-long meeting in Dharamsala, and they start by acknowledging their shared vulnerability. For instance, the Archbishop was dealing with the return of his prostate cancer and undergoing experimental treatment at the time.
Right. And this really sets the stage for their whole conversation. The Archbishop says, we are fragile creatures, and it is from this weakness, not despite it, that we discover the possibility of true joy. I mean, that's powerful stuff.
It is. It's like a reminder that joy isn't about being untouched by life's difficulties, but about finding it within them.
Exactly. And the book also shares these little glimpses into their relationship, like how they greeted each other when they first met. The Archbishop gently touched the Dalai Lama's cheek and then gave him a kiss, which kind of surprised the Dalai Lama at first, but then he just laughed.
That's sweet.
And throughout the book, you see their playful banter and teasing, which really highlights their deep friendship and intimacy. It shows you that even these incredibly wise and respected figures connect on a very human level.
So they're not just these, untouchable spiritual beings.
Right, exactly. And they even joke about some pretty heavy topics, and I think that shows you that it's okay to find humor even in difficult situations.
I like that. So moving on, they talk about this common idea, often found in religious teachings, that lasting happiness doesn't just come from the things you experience through your senses.
Right. They draw a distinction between joy and simply pleasure. There's a Buddhist analogy about trying to quench your thirst by drinking salt water. Sensory gratification might feel good in the moment, but ultimately it leaves you wanting more.
Like it just makes you thirstier.
Yeah. And they explore the differences between physical happiness and mental happiness. The Dalai Lama talks about his perspective on food. You need food to survive. But the key is to eat without attachment, not out of greed, but to nourish the body.
I can see that.
And there's a cute little story about the Dalai Lama. He really enjoys Tibetan rice and yogurt pudding, which shows that even deeply spiritual people don't have to deny themselves simple pleasures.
Yeah, it's more about the attitude.
Exactly. They even share a Tibetan Buddhist prayer that said before meals, viewing food as medicine, eating without greed or anger, just to nourish the body.
That's a nice way to look at it. So essentially, they're saying that mental joy and happiness are more important for lasting satisfaction than just physical pleasure.
Exactly. If your mind is filled with worries and anxieties, even the most comfortable physical setting won't really bring you lasting joy.
Right. And that's where the science comes in. They bring up research by Richard Davidson on the brain circuits that affect well-being. One key takeaway is that love and compassion are powerful ways to maintain positive mental states.
Yeah. It's interesting how they connect these spiritual qualities to neurobiology. And then the Archbishop, he builds on that. He says your greatest joy comes from doing good for others. And he relates it to this African concept called Ubuntu, which essentially means I am because we are. It emphasizes our interconnectedness.
So it's about seeing yourself as part of a larger whole, not just an individual.
Right. And they describe this beautiful idea of a virtuous cycle. When you heal your own pain, it becomes easier for you to turn to the pain of others. And as you focus on easing the suffering of others, you actually increase your own joy.
Wow, I like that. So the aim is not just to find joy for yourself, but to also become a source of joy for others.
Right, like a reservoir of joy, an oasis of peace that can positively impact everyone around you.
Now they introduce the central framework of the book, the 8 pillars of joy. This is where they lay out those practical attitudes and actions for cultivating joy.
These 8 pillars emerged from their conversations as key themes, things that both the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop highlighted again and again as crucial for living a joyful life.
And those 8 pillars are perspective, humility, humor, acceptance, forgiveness, gratitude, compassion, and generosity. We're going to go through each of these in detail.
That's good.
Starting with perspective. It's so true how the way you see things really shapes your whole experience.
Absolutely. They talk about how your perspective directly influences your body's stress response. If you perceive something as a threat, your body reacts very differently than if you see it as a challenge.
Right, like the release of cortisol and adrenaline.
Exactly. Those hormones are meant to help us in dangerous situations. But the problem is, if you're constantly stressed, that can actually be harmful, even down to the cellular level.
Yeah, I've heard about how stress can affect your telomeres.
Right, those are the protective caps at the ends of your DNA. And chronic stress can actually shorten them. But there are things you can do to shift your perspective. The Dalai Lama, he shares this great insight. After he left Tibet, he realized that everyone is fundamentally the same. And this realization actually reduced his nervousness when he was giving teachings.
That's fascinating. So seeing others as fellow human beings, just like him, helped him overcome that fear.
Exactly. And the Archbishop suggests a similar approach for you. If you're feeling worried or anxious, try to think about others who are in similar or even more challenging situations. Remember, you're not alone in your struggles.
I see. It's about connecting with that larger human experience.
Yes. And they emphasize how connection brings joy, while separation leads to sorrow. When you see yourself as separate from others, they can easily become a threat in your mind. But when you recognize your interconnectedness, you can face challenges together.
There's a great story in the book about the Archbishop's reaction when someone cut him off in traffic.
Oh, yeah. His initial response was surprise, which is natural. But then he immediately shifted to humor and acceptance. He even thought about possible reasons for the other driver's behavior. Maybe they were rushing to the hospital or something.
That's such a great example. It shows you have a choice in how you interpret events.
Exactly. And they talk about perspectival myopia. That's that feeling of being nearsighted when you're stressed. You can't see the bigger picture.
Oh, yeah, I know that feeling. So the invitation is to try to see the good, even in difficult situations, to find the potential for joy within sorrow.
Right. And Jinpa, he's a scholar who worked with the Dalai Lama, he offers a thought experiment. Think about a past event that you perceived as negative. Now consider all the good that ultimately came from it.
That's interesting. So it's not about being naive or ignoring reality, but about having a broader perspective.
Exactly. And they even touch on the God's eye perspective, that sense of oneness and interconnectedness that astronauts often describe when they see Earth from space.
Oh, right. The overview effect.
Yes. And this wider perspective naturally reduces self-centered thinking and rumination. Those negative thought loops, it can be so draining.
Okay. The next pillar is humility, and this isn't about putting yourself down, is it?
Not at all. They connect humility to recognizing our common humanity. The Dalai Lama, he says that when he's giving talks, he sees himself as just another person, one human being talking to others. And that recognition actually helps him feel more at ease.
Interesting. So it's about letting go of that ego, that sense of separateness.
Right. There's another story in the book about some Chinese officials. During an official visit, a bowl of fruit tipped over. And even though these officials were very serious and reserved, they immediately got down on their knees to help pick it up.
That's kind of funny. So even in those very formal settings, our shared humanity can shine through.
Exactly. The book also points out that the word humility comes from the Latin word for earth, humus. It reminds us of our groundedness, our shared origins.
I love that. And the Archbishop shares a funny story about being mistaken for another bishop. He was trying to look humble, but it backfired. It highlights the importance of not taking ourselves too seriously.
Right. It's about recognizing your limitations and not feeling the need to be superior to others or put yourself above them.
It's about finding that balance, not feeling superior, but also not feeling like you're not good enough.
Exactly.
Okay, so the next pillar is humor. And this seems like it was a big part of their time together.
Oh, absolutely. The book talks about how much laughter filled their conversations. They were almost like a comedy duo at times, and they used humor to challenge expectations and break down barriers.
They were joking around even when they were discussing some pretty heavy topics. It's almost like humor was a way for them to connect on a deeper level.
Yes, they even suggest that a good sense of humor can be a sign of spiritual development.
Interesting. So it's not just about being funny, but about having a certain perspective on life.
Exactly. And they link humor back to that word humus, to humility. Laughing at ourselves reminds us of our shared humanity. And there's even research that shows people who laugh more are less likely to have heart attacks. So there are health benefits to humor, too.
Good to know. And the Archbishop's use of humor during the apartheid era is particularly striking. He would use humor to diffuse tense situations.
Oh, right. He tells a story about the creation of black and white people. And he also has a story about the big-nose people and the small-nose people in Rwanda after the genocide. He uses these humorous stories to point out the absurdity of prejudice.
I love that. So humor can be a powerful tool for addressing serious issues.
Absolutely. And they emphasize that humor is a skill that can be cultivated. It starts with learning to laugh at yourself, to not take yourself too seriously.
And they say that finding humor in life makes everything easier.
Yeah, it helps you accept others, accept life's challenges.
All right, the fourth pillar is acceptance. And this seems a bit paradoxical, right?
It does. The Buddhist perspective is that you need goals to grow, but you shouldn't get overly attached to achieving them in a specific way.
So you set goals, but you also need to be open to things unfolding differently than you planned.
Exactly. Jinpa explains that a lot of things are outside your control. Your responsibility is to do your best, but without being fixated on a particular outcome.
That makes sense.
And the Archbishop has this great analogy. He compares our spiritual capacity to muscles. They need to be exercised in order to grow stronger. And he says life is an opportunity to exercise those spiritual muscles, to become more loving, more compassionate.
It's like those challenges we face are actually opportunities for growth.
Right. They also share Edith Eva Eger's experience in a concentration camp. She found that accepting the reality of her situation and staying curious about the future were key to her survival.
Wow, that's powerful.
And they conclude that accepting the present moment is what makes it possible to forgive the past.
Which leads perfectly to forgiveness, the first pillar of the heart.
And the stories in this section are truly remarkable. The book talks about the Truth and Reconciliation Commission in South Africa. There were mothers who forgave the people who had killed their children. And Amy Beale's parents, they supported amnesty for their daughter's murderers. It's just astounding.
That's incredible. It shows the amazing capacity humans have for forgiveness.
Right. And the book also points out that there's evidence of peacemaking even in the animal kingdom. So forgiveness isn't just this lofty human ideal.
Interesting. So they contrast the cycle of revenge with the cycle of forgiveness.
Yes. And the Archbishop, he shares a very personal story. He regrets not listening to his father the night before he died. And he talks about how heavy that burden of unforgiveness can be.
I see. And the Dalai Lama offers a very compassionate perspective, even on those who cause harm. He suggests that someone who does something terrible when they're drunk, for example, may not be acting from their true self.
Right, it's about seeing beyond the action.
That's a very different way of looking at it.
Yeah.
So they emphasize that forgiveness is about freeing yourself from the past, letting go of anger and resentment.
Yes. It's a gift you give yourself.
All right, the sixth pillar is gratitude. And it seems like both the Dalai Lama and the Archbishop really embody gratitude in their lives.
Absolutely. The Dalai Lama has a daily practice of acknowledging how precious human life is and resolving not to waste it. And throughout the book, they're both constantly expressing gratitude for things.
They define gratitude as recognizing everything that sustains us, everything that makes this moment possible.
And it shifts your focus from what you're lacking to what you have. The Dalai Lama talks about how grateful he is for the opportunities that arose even in exile.
So he sees the positive even in a difficult situation.
Right. He realized that exile stripped away pretense and brought him closer to reality. It allowed him to develop more empathy and compassion.
That's a powerful perspective.
Yeah.
And they even suggest being grateful for your enemies, seeing them as teachers.
Yes. They can teach you patience, tolerance, and even compassion. And they share the story of Nelson Mandela. After being imprisoned for years, he was so grateful for every drop of rain.
That's incredible. It shows how gratitude can transform even the most difficult experiences.
Exactly. Gratitude leads you to act from a sense of abundance, not scarcity. And it fosters a willingness to share.
Now let's talk about compassion. The book seems to suggest that this could have even been a more fitting title.
Oh, absolutely. The Dalai Lama says too much self-centered thinking is the source of suffering. A compassionate concern for others' well-being is the source of happiness.
So focusing on yourself too much actually leads to unhappiness.
That's what they're saying. And this message of love and compassion is found in many different spiritual traditions. It's also supported by scientific research.
Interesting. So they're saying that compassion is a fundamental part of human nature.
Yes. And they stress that compassion isn't just a feeling, it's a skill that can be cultivated. It starts with recognizing our shared humanity.
But what about those people who say, I have enough problems of my own, why should I worry about others?
They address that question directly. The Dalai Lama compares the faces of people like Stalin and Hitler, who lacked compassion, with the faces of Gandhi, the Archbishop, Mandela.
Oh, right, the compassionate leaders.
Exactly. And he points out how compassion leads to inner peace and a positive legacy. The Archbishop also says that acting compassionately brings a unique kind of joy.
So it's not just good for others, it's good for you too.
Exactly. They explain that we're wired to be other-regarding, and we actually suffer when we focus too much on ourselves.
But what about the fear that comes with compassion? You know, the fear of being taken advantage of or not being able to handle the suffering of others.
They acknowledge that fear, and they distinguish between empathy, which is feeling another person's emotions, and compassion, which is wanting what's best for them and taking action to help.
So empathy is more about feeling with someone, while compassion is about doing something to help.
Exactly. They use the analogy of someone being crushed by a rock. Compassion means removing the rock, not just feeling their pain.
Right, so they reiterate that paradox.
Yeah.
We're actually most joyful when we focus on others.
Yes. And they share the story of Peter Hinton, who found joy in prison by focusing on the problems of others. And there's the example of the mother who takes in abandoned children. These are beautiful examples of compassion in action.
So they're saying compassion isn't just a nice idea, it's actually a powerful force for good.
Exactly. And it has benefits in the secular world, too. They talk about how companies that treat their employees with compassion are more successful. Yeah, like some Japanese companies, their whole philosophy is based on caring for their employees, and it works really well for them.
So compassion benefits everyone.
Absolutely. And they emphasize the need to teach compassion to future generations.
That makes sense. I mean, the world needs more compassion.
Right. And for those of you who might be feeling overwhelmed by the suffering in the world, they say, to start where you are, do what you can, because compassion can be contagious.
I love that idea. So you don't have to solve all the world's problems at once. Just focus on what you can do.
Right. And the Dalai Lama talks about this practice called Tonglen. It involves taking on the suffering of others and giving back love and forgiveness.
Wow, that sounds powerful.
It is. He even practiced it during the Tibetan uprising as a way to maintain inner peace and cultivate compassion in a very difficult situation.
All right, the final pillar is generosity.
And this pillar, it kind of ties everything together. They describe generosity of spirit as encompassing all the other pillars of joy.
So perspective, humility, humor, acceptance, forgiveness, gratitude, and compassion.
Exactly. And they talk about wise, selfish generosity, the idea that helping others ultimately brings you joy.
Right. So it's not just about being selfless, but also recognizing that generosity benefits you as well.
Exactly.
The book concludes with a celebration at the Tibetan Children's Village and then the Archbishop's departure.
It was a really beautiful occasion. The Dalai Lama visited the school, and what was supposed to be a small birthday celebration turned into a huge event with over 2,000 children.
Wow. That's amazing.
There were traditional Tibetan greetings and ceremonies, and some of the young Tibetan refugees shared their stories about leaving their families and homeland.
I can only imagine how moving that must have been.
It was, and despite all the hardship they'd endured, the children were so resilient and full of gratitude. There was singing and dancing, even a Tibetan version of "If You're Happy and You Know It" and "Happy Birthday."
Oh, how sweet.
And then there was a final session before the Archbishop had to leave to attend another funeral. And they talked about the importance of passing on wisdom from one generation to the next.
So it wasn't just about celebrating joy in the present moment, but also ensuring that future generations have access to these teachings.
Exactly. And there's a lot of gratitude expressed, both for the experience they shared together and for the opportunity to share their wisdom with the world.
They also connected those practices back to science, highlighting the brain's ability to change through attention and awareness.
Right. You're not stuck with the brain you're born with. You can actually train your mind to become more joyful and compassionate.
That's encouraging. And then the book also includes a section on joy practices.
Yes. They offer specific techniques for cultivating each of the pillars of joy.
Like what?
Well, they mention breathing exercises for focus and stress relief, different kinds of meditation, thoughtlessness, focused attention, analytical meditation.
So practical tools that anyone can use.
Right. And they have practices for dealing with difficult emotions like fear, frustration, anger, sadness, and loneliness.
I think we could all use some help with that.
Definitely. They talk about the fourfold path of forgiveness and compassion meditation as a way to foster joy. They even have a death meditation to help you gain perspective and gratitude.
That sounds intense, but I can see how contemplating death might make you appreciate life more.
Exactly. And they also highlight the humility practice, also known as lojong, and the importance of cultivating humor.
So it's a really comprehensive set of practices.
It is. They cover a lot of ground.
So as we wrap up this deep dive into the Book of Joy, what are some of the key takeaways?
Well, first and foremost, understanding that joy is different from happiness. Joy is a deeper state that doesn't depend on external circumstances. And the good news is that it can be cultivated even in the midst of difficulty.
Right. And those 8 pillars, they offer a practical roadmap for cultivating joy in your life. Perspective, humility, humor, acceptance, forgiveness, gratitude, compassion, and generosity.
Exactly. And these aren't just abstract ideas. They're actions you can take, attitudes you can adopt in your daily life.
So to all of you listening, I encourage you to think about which of these pillars resonates most with you right now, or maybe which one you find most challenging.
And then take a look at those joy practices. Even small, consistent efforts can make a big difference in your overall well-being.
And here's a final thought to leave you with. We talked about wise, selfish generosity, the idea that helping others brings us joy. So I wonder, could the most effective way to increase your own joy be to actively focus on bringing joy to others? What would happen if you experimented with that in your daily life? Something to think about, isn't it?
It is.
All right, well, that's it for this deep dive.
Thanks for listening.
We'll see you next time.